Hey there, Andrea here. I hope you're doing amazing. I highlighted such a wonderful book, and today we're going to talk all about burnout, the secret to solving the stress cycle. So, burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion, and it can be caused by certain things of prolonged stress, just general overwhelm, feeling emotionally drained, or just unable to meet the demands that are placed on you. So, I bet you've experienced burnout. I know I have. It's just when you feel completely exhausted and just at your wits' end, and you're kind of feeling like, oh my gosh, like this is terrible. So, burnout is. It can be accompanied rather by many things such as like physical health problems, just general strain. It can affect your health in many, many ways. And you just feel and you don't function as well as you could be. And it can be really hard, right? It's hard to function in your everyday life when you're feeling burnt out, when you're feeling exhausted and depleted. So it can happen on so many levels. So people who feel burnt out generally feel empty, they feel exhausted and unable to cope with the demands that life is placing on you. So I love this idea because this book called Burnout: The Secret to Solving the Stress Cycle by Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski. They're sisters, actually, and they created this groundbreaking book that explains why people experience burnout. And they actually provide us with science-based, science-backed plan to help minimize stress and manage our emotions so that we can live a more joyful, well life. So we're going to delve in. So sisters Emily and Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski, they help us know and understand that the cycle of feeling overwhelmed and exhausted is actually quite common. And this is what makes us human. So, but they give us wonderful ways that instead of ignoring all these obstacles in life and ignoring the bad things, it's like bad things are going to happen, challenges are going to happen in our life. And what they do is they actually teach us how we can navigate these real obstacles and these real societal pressures that actually stand between us and our well-being. So they explain that, you know what? We can be compassionate about this. We can be optimistic and we can stand up to this. And they really show us how to fight back so that burnout cannot be a thing for us or as common. So burnout really does address the question of how can we love our body? And, you know, even though every single magazine in the world is convincing us that we're not good, it teaches us about, you know, how can we lean in when there's like 110, we're already giving 110%. How can we do more? It teaches us about, you know, how we can live happily, when we live in a society that puts so much pressure on us, right? Maybe making us feel, especially for women, maybe too fat, maybe too needy, maybe noisy, maybe selfish. And there's sometimes a lot of pressure from our society and how to measure up. I mean, I don't know about you, but, you know, we got to be super mom. We got to run a career. We've got to, you know, all these things, be a really good spouse. And it's really hard. It can put a lot of pressure on us. So let's delve in and discover the scientifically proven method for dealing with stress and society's unreal expectations of us. And let's be real, those news feeds, those social media is not always representative of what's going on in people's lives, right? Those people that look so put together, they're working really hard to be put together like that. And I'm sure they're not always put together. So now, this is what we're going to do. Guess what? We're going to run for our life. Now, this sounds really funny, but they talk about in their book this idea of the stress cycle. So, what you can do is basically when you are under pressure or stress, the best thing that we can do is close the stress cycle. So, we have to complete the biological stress cycle and return our body to a state of relaxation. So, stress can be really dangerous and terrible and damaging on our bodies. So it's important to always close this stress cycle. We tend to get stuck in emotions of stress. We tend to get stuck in, this place that feels uncomfortable when we feel pressure and overwhelm and anxiety and like just anxious. And so this idea is that we want to close the stress cycle. So we tend to get stuck in that emotion of stress. So this can be dangerous for our health. So stress is a neurological and physiological response that's triggered by a perceived threat. So when we feel threatened, we have a neurological response as well as a physiological response to deal with that perceived threat. The problem is nowadays it's chronically activated. So all this neurological and hormonal response that comes from stress are designed to make us do one thing. And guess what that is? It's run. Is designed to make us run for our life. So stress gets wired into us when there's a perceived threat. The thing that we're supposed to do is basically run, get out of there. And so the stress cycle starts by releasing this hormone of epinephrine, norepinephrine, corticosteroids, cortisol, all these hormones for a rush of push blood into our muscles. And as a result, our blood pressure and heart rate go up and our muscles tense, our breath quickens. It's also that we can run when we're under this stress response. It's basically that expression like haul ass away from whatever that theoretical challenging and charging lion or rhinoceros. And so we're wired to do this. So our body then shuts down functions such as growth, such as cell repair, such as digestion, reproduction, and even immunity. They're all slowed down when we're in that stress response. You've heard of that, right? Fight or flight, but there's also fight, flight, or freeze. And so in modern society, all these pressures that we endure on a regular basis, they're chronic, they're over and over. And I don't know like what situation you're in, but when I loved someone with an addiction, holy cow, I was in that stress response on a regular basis. And it can be damaging. We know stress is damaging. So this chronic activation. So the danger, there's damage with the dangers that stress, stress brings this chronic high blood pressure, higher risk of heart disease, compromised immune system, digestive system upset. And even we won't heal as quickly because our immune system is pushed, is shut down and closed down when we're in the stress response. So there's higher risk of digestion related illnesses as well. You can see how stress negatively impacts us, especially chronic stress. So all this means one thing: we need to close this stress cycle. And they talk about it within this book. As often as possible, we need to close this stress cycle. So stress is about running for your life. Now, I know what you're thinking. Do I have to run to close this stress cycle? I'm like you, I'm not a runner. I actually get itchy legs, itchy arms. So this idea is that we want to close the stress cycle. Stress is about running for your life. So the natural ending of this stress cycle is that you're going to arrive home safely after running for your life. So knowing what to do to close this stress cycle is going to be key for you. So let's talk about that. All right, so closing the stress cycle is the key. So sisters Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski, they talk about the importance of this stress cycle and closing it. So the good news is though, is that we don't have to just do it by running. That's the general thing. Moving, it's almost like they say that energy, emotion is like getting the emotion out. So you can close the stress cycle actually by running, by swimming, by biking, by dancing, by engaging in something that's going to get your blood pumping, such as exercise. And they suggest that anywhere from 20 to 60 minutes can really make a big difference. It's going to close that stress cycle for you. I know about you, like when you get in an argument or something, it's like you want to just go out and run, or you want to like punch, a punching bag or something like that. That's natural. That's because your body is seeking to close that stress cycle. The other thing we can do, and they talk about it within their book, is we can shift our mood. So alternatively, we can create a place that makes us feel safe, like we've had this safe return home. And that can be through creative expression, that can be through painting, it can be through social interactions that make you feel safe. It can be anything that's going to signal to you a safe return home. Right? So when you've gone in through and you've triggered the stress response, or you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed, or just anxious, another way that you can close that loop is to imitate the safe return home, right? This is all pre-wired, hardwired from our hunting and gathering, hardwired in our brain. So the idea here is that your body naturally is programmed to run. It has all the hormones that are going to help us run. So exercise or movement or dancing or just getting it out is really important. But then also the other part of that too is that mimicking that safe return home, that you're safe, that you're okay, that you talk with someone that makes you feel safe, talk with a loved one, or just massage or calmness in your house, or just so like creative expression, social interactions, anything that's going to signal a safe return home. So affection and laughter also provide an opportunity to close that stress cycle. So life is going to present us with a frustrating, stressful things, right? So sometimes we want to manage also the monitor, is what they called it, which is in our brain. That's what regulates the emotion of frustration. So they do talk about this within their book, and they're saying you can manage frustration through what they call positive reappraisal and plan for problem solving. So that's two separate things, right? So positive reappraisal is a wonderful way to help us manage frustrations in life and therefore stress. And then also plan for problem solving can also help us manage for frustrations and stress. So working out an effective strategy against stress requires, understanding the difference between stress and stressors. So stressors are the things that get you stressed. So they might be like, someone taking your parking spot, or, someone not coming home and not calling you all night and you're worried about them. So stressors are basically things that get you stressed. Stress is the experience of it. So once you have the stressors, you feel the sense of stress. So some stressors are controllable and some stressors are not controllable. And the idea here is that when stress is a state of emotional and mental strain or tension resulting from an adverse or demanding circumstance. So stressors are the factors that cause that stress. So we want to make sure we know the difference between the two, because some stressors are controllable and some are not controllable. So let's talk about a couple of things that can help us. So positive reappraisal can help us with uncontrollable stressors. So these are things that we have no control over. So positive appraisal is a way of reframing difficult situations to find positive opportunities, right? It's about looking at the facts and the truth, not in a delusional sort of way, but looking at it from a way as, okay, well, what's possible here? Like, I don't have control over this, but what's possible for me here? What can I do? How can I flip it? What can I do here? That's a positive reappraisal. That's looking at something, a stressor, that is not in your control. You can't do anything about it anyway. So how can you reframe it? How can you look for facts and truth about it, not be in delusion, and look what's possible, right? And that really does help with the frustration around things. The other thing we can do is what's called planful problem solving. They talk about it in their book. They can help us with controllable stressors. So analyzing any frustrating situation or any stress that you're going through, and look at ways to solve it or even lessen the frustration. So many frustrations, they come from our monitor, our brain, and that monitor mechanism of the brain is constantly assessing like our current situation and also our plans for the future. So our brain can get frustrated by problems that are out of our control, just like they can get frustrated from things that are in our control. So this idea here is to lessen the frustration by recognizing when things are out of our control and when things are maybe in our control. And then when things are in our control, we can come up with some planful problem solving. Makes sense, right? So reframe frustrating tasks. Reframing these frustrating tasks are, and just remember though, sometimes tasks that feel frustrating while you're doing them are actually more rewarding in the end. And they do give us that reminder in the book. And so next time you're in a difficult situation, remember that it's better, that it's a better chance for personal growth when you're feeling frustrated, when you're feeling something's challenging. You're probably going to have a wonderful opportunity for personal growth from that, right? Than if it were easy. So that's a nice way of reframing it. But the main message here is this idea of planful problem solving that can help you with things that are controllable. So come up with a solution, analyze the frustrating situations, and find ways that you can solve it or simply lessen that frustration and burden. So the next part that they talked about, which I really loved, is called managing your expectations, right? Expectations actually determine the level of our frustration. So we can cope better just by knowing that unrealistic expectations, they can create lots of frustration. They can actually cause more stress. So what is it that you're expecting, right? So sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves because we are comparing ourselves with the external world and other people's social media feed or what have you. And in the book, they call this the bikini industry complex, right? It's a complex that that's really puts a lot of pressure on, especially women, to measure up to a certain expectations. But it's rigged because all this industry wants you to feel like you're less than, so you can purchase all their products. So they do talk a lot about that within their book. But I think the main message here and the key takeaway is managing your expectations can also help you manage frustrations. So society often tells us that, that things and messages that make us feel frustrated and make us feel stuck. And sometimes the message too is, if you're feeling stressed, well, just soak in a tub and do your nails and like throw some bath balls in there. But the reality is that we might need, there's nothing wrong with you when you feel stressed. There's nothing wrong with you if you're feeling overwhelmed and anxious. And sometimes we might need a little bit more than just bath balls and baths. It's more than that. It's really about honoring the notion that we need to close this stress cycle. We need to manage expectations of us and be realistic in what our expectations are for ourselves. And this is a really, really important thing because a lot of this pressure to conform or this pressure for unattainable or unrealistic expectations, they're causing huge amounts of stress. And so they talk a lot about that in their book, and that can cause a lot of burnout, exhaustion, and depletion. And in positive psychology, it's called social comparison, which sometimes isn't the greatest. I always say socially compare for inspiration, not to measure yourself on a timeline. Okay, so what we can do is we can build a resilience to stress, and how we do that is through rest, through human connections, through befriending your inner critic, not being so hard on ourselves, and really focusing on this idea of recovery. And so what you want to do is just know what you want and find your meaning. So according to the father of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, you want to focus on the secrets to happiness. One of the secrets to happiness is focusing and finding your meaning. What's important to you? What do you value, right? And this will really help you in your own life and help you with, coping with the stressful world, is putting and creating more meaning in your own life and making you feel good with who you are. So, how do you find it? That's a big question, right? And there's the book that I read called Down Girl, and it's by Kate Mann, and it's all about describing the two classes of people, the human givers and the human beings. And this idea is the human givers are expected to devote their time and their attention, their bodies and to others. Whereas the human being is all about connecting to your own self, to your own needs, and making the world a better place as a result. So people often suffer from human giver syndrome, and we fall into that role of human giver rather than tending to our own needs and seeking our own meaning. And so this is really important in order to help us manage stress and expectations. And the message that we often receive is that we should be, kind and helpful and giving and pretty and perfect. And this idea, though, is to tap into your own needs and what brings you meaning. What do you value? And I really encourage you to do that. They also talk about ways to build our resilience to stress. Is that the fact of life is that we need other people. Other people matter. So needing people is a fact of life, and that we need to have it go back and forth and feel a sense of, where we're in solitude, but also feeling connected to others. And it's really important because we connect to others because they provide us emotional support, they provide us with medical support sometimes, and just a big amount of sharing information and education. These high quality relationships and connections are so essential for our well-being, and they actually help us manage stress and become more resilient, right? Think about that best friend that you talk about, and you just, sometimes you got to just vent out everything out and just get it out and have a nice conversation, or have that conversation like, what? He was in the garage until 5 o'clock in the morning. They're like, what? That's not normal. Like, that, right? It's almost like it's good for education, connecting and recognizing, and also honoring your value. These connections are so important. Friends or partners, they can really help you find a compassionate voice and love towards yourself as well, and help you manage stress. So rest and sleep obviously are crucial for your health and your productivity and avoiding burnout. So the saying, I love this part, the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, is actually faulty. And they talk about this in their book, that it causes us to push aside our actual needs. And it's really important to remember that, it's being kind to yourself. Science tells us what makes us stronger is actually rest and sleep, right? So we must rest between tasks, right? During the rest, the brain can go into that default mode network where the brain is, assessing current problems, it's finding solutions, it's really helping us in many ways. So rest is a wonderful way to help us manage stress and be more resilient. So rest is best. They also talk about shifting from tasks. It doesn't have to be like, lying down and taking a nap kind of rest. That is one form, but it also can be just shifting from one task to another. So in that, what they call that active rest. So when you've been, in one area working on one thing, it's like going out and doing another thing is a form of rest. So that's important too, right? So sleep, your body is wonderful because it's going into repair mode. The brain is time to process new information that you've learned in the day, and it consolidates and it's stored properly. So rest and sleep are really crucial and important for our ability to manage stress and prevent burnout. And also, I love this part in their book. They talk all about controlling what they call the mad woman, but it could be the madman or the inner critic, whatever's coming up, because it can be so mean. We can be so mean to ourselves inside our heads. And so they do talk about practicing self-compassion. It's the key to feeling strong and being joyful. It's the key to managing stress and being more resilient. So controlling that voice that's going on inside your head, like you hear the inner critic whenever you have failed at something, whenever you feel like you haven't lived up to something. It's really important to hear that inner critic and name it. So some of the suggestions that they have is self-criticism. It's usually we are critical when it's detail oriented. We always seem to focus on like, we didn't do our best, or like, wow, you don't look so good, or, so get that self-critical voice under control, and then that will really help you practice self-compassion. So self-compassion is basically a form of healing, and sometimes that inner critic can be causing more stress and burnout and overwhelm. And so one of the major parts in this book is, and to help us with that, is to get a hold of that, right? So we can move more towards joy. So taking time to feel grateful towards the people in your life and the good events that are happening each day, taking time to appreciate yourself and speak kindly in kind ways towards yourself, just like you would, just like a loving mother would say to a daughter, just like your best friend would talk. Make sure you're talking that way to yourself as well. So this book was so good, Burnout. It was just incredible because it really does help us. There are so many reasons why we might face burnout. We don't necessarily have to, we might not be closing that stress cycle, and we might not even be aware of how often we are stressed. So fortunately, there's things that we can do. We can exercise, we can go through creativity, we can practice affection, we can dance. So we live in a really unbalanced society that puts pressure on us that can really feel frustrating. And by recognizing these factors and also striking back against that critical inner voice and that part of us that's really hard on ourselves, we can begin to really ease that pressure. We can begin to close that stress cycle and really focus on what's important to us. What are our needs? What do we value? So knowing this information and the importance of closing that stress loop, what are ways that you can close your stress loop? What are you going to add into your life? So will you run? Will you talk through your challenges with a friend? Or will you name that inner mad person or that inner critic? So the idea here is, what expectations will you look for? Like, what expectations will you look at more effectively and manage those expectations and see where you can be more self-compassionate, right? And really practice that. So there you go. That is that book. It is so fantastic. I hope you enjoyed it. It's all about burnout, the secret to solving the stress cycle, which is closing that stress loop. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.